Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this Edinburgh Trade Union Council special public meeting, Tuesday the 27th of July 2021, to promote the retrofitting of heating systems in houses across Edinburgh. My name's Claire. I'll chair this meeting on behalf of the ETUC. The Edinburgh Trade Union Council believe that significantly increasing the efficiency of heating systems and developing a large skilled workforce to complete the task would be a worthy campaign in helping to slow climate change. We are keen to promote campaigns which reduce biodiversity loss and reduce climate change, and so we wish to persuade the City of Edinburgh Council and the Scottish Government to provide the resources to allow retrofitting in council houses, social housing and private sector housing. Retrofitting systems will reduce energy use and increase efficiency of heating systems, which will lead to a reduction in bills, as well as the use of and emissions from fossil fuels. Tonight we'll hear from 4 speakers. Ellen Robottom is here from Leeds Trade Union Council. Ellen is a Unite member and the lead writer of a document which called for a programme of mass homes refit in Leeds to be implemented by the City Council in partnership with the College of Building and with trade unions and council groups. Ellen is currently helping to write the energy chapter of Climate Jobs, Building a Workforce for the Climate Emergency. Stuart Graham's here from Glasgow Trade Union Council to update us on their retrofitting campaign. It was Edinburgh TUC which sparked our interest in retrofitting heating systems, and we are very interested on what their current thinking is and how they're progressing in the west of Scotland. Linda Clarke of the University of Westminster is here, a professor and director of the Centre for the Study of the Production of the Built Environment. And finally, Maria Torres Quevedo from Living Rent, Scotland's Trade Tenant Union in Edinburgh. Maria sits on the National Committee and will be speaking on how Living Rent's national demands and local campaigns are relevant to the retrofitting that needs to take place in Scotland. A warm welcome to all of you and many thanks for sharing your knowledge and time with us here in Edinburgh. So we'll hear from our speakers and then I'll open the meeting for discussion and questions before we move to action points in around the final 20 minutes of the meeting. We'll finish at 8 o'clock. Feel free to use the chat function to note any questions. The closed caption feature is available if anybody wishes it. I respectfully ask that you mute your mic while we're listening to the speakers. Ellen, have you made it in? I would like to invite you to speak first.
I am here, yeah. I'm very sorry. I seem to have written in my diary that you were starting at 7, so I'm really sorry. It's been a hectic day.
No problem. Stuart to the rescue.
Can you still see and hear me if I open this document?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, it'd be good for me to be able to just read from that a bit. So
sure. Thank you.
Just so long as it's not off-putting for anybody. So yeah, I've just really so just got about 10 minutes, I guess. So I'm going to be fairly quick, go over this fairly quickly. Start off by saying a bit about why we actually launched this campaign and a little bit about where it's got to up to now. So I will share this document with everybody when I finish speaking. This is the document that we wrote last summer, Retrofit Leeds Homes with High Quality Insulation and Heat Pumps. And the other document is the chapter on built that's just been referred to by the chair, the new pamphlet that's coming out by the Campaign Against Climate Change Trade Union Group. It's not ready for publication yet, but the buildings chapter is almost ready, so you can read that if you want to. So the reason why we focused on retrofit was think some of it's just been said, that heating and hot water for buildings accounts for about 20% of UK greenhouse gas emissions. The domestic sector uses about 27% of all energy supplied in the UK, and about 2/3 of this is for heating and hot water. So just a little bit about the target for emissions reductions that's been set by the UK government. They're talking about net zero by 2050, but actually from a climate justice perspective, we recognise that really this is a very, very lax target. It gives us far more than our fair share of emissions still to use. So we ought to be aiming for and let's leave aside the net because that's controversial as well, but we should be aiming to complete that target by 2038. So that means roughly doubling the amount of electricity producing it all from renewable sources, but it still leaves us, as we've calculated, to make something like 40% cuts in energy demand across the whole economy. So when you look at the figures about the proportion of energy that's used for space heating, for heating buildings, it's clear that this is one of the priorities, is to cut the energy demand in that area. Right, a good deep retrofit in many buildings can actually reduce the energy demand by as much as 80%, but we can't do all of that within the next few years, for reasons that I think will get expanded on in the course of this meeting. But we have to prioritise. So doing the work that makes the biggest difference, the worst stock residents that are in fuel poverty, as we're doing that, of course, we're then providing apprenticeships and work experience and training people up. And in the campaign against climate change document, we've suggested that we need to build that workforce to, we're going to be getting to a couple of million workers by the end of the decade, if we're going to really do it properly. And then, of course, they continue to complete the work that's been started, bringing every building up to the best standard possible. So in order to do that, it can't be done without a massive expansion of training and without improvement in the level of training given. It can't be done without building local supply chains. We don't have adequate supply chains for insulating materials, and there can be a big discussion about what kind of insulating materials we should be using. High quality windows, we need triple glazed windows. They're not currently manufactured in this country. The same with heat pumps. Leeds is importing its heat pumps from Italy. A lot come, I believe, from Japan. So we need those large-scale projects, and we need them to be instigated by councils collaborating with the training providers, the colleges, and we need them to be using direct labour, in-house apprenticeships to really integrate this whole thing, because you can't train people unless there's work for them to go to, and you can't provide that work unless you've got people adequately skilled. So what we need as campaigners, we need a mass campaign, obviously for council, in areas where councils are not doing this or could be doing more, a mass campaign directed at the council, but also we need really a UK-wide mass campaign for a policy framework to enable this to happen, because it needs a lot more funding, it needs a lot more powers for local authorities, and it needs a lot more statutory standards as well for buildings. So just going on to where we've got up to, we have been very slow getting this off the ground for all sorts of reasons that I probably don't need to go into. But at the minute, we've got really a good collaboration between the Trades Council group, people in Leeds Extinction Rebellion, and people in our future Leeds. And I've only just learned that there now exists an Our Future Edinburgh, which is really, I think, is really exciting. So and the way this collaborations actually come together in Leeds is through trying to pull people together to organise around COP26. So I think there's a lot of things coming together here. So just a little bit about what Leeds City Council has done so far. As councils go, in certainly might be a different situation in Scotland, but as English councils go, Leeds City Council is relatively good, and I say with the emphasis on the relative. But they have done a lot of work trying to bring in grant funding for retrofit and for low energy heating. So they've done. They've estimated that they actually need £8 billion to make all 330,000 Leeds homes carbon neutral, and their budget for this current financial year is 500 million. So you can see the shortfall there. So a lot of energy goes into into putting in bids for all these various different grants that come from different pots all over the place. And I probably, you can probably see that, but I don't really need to go into all of them. They come from many different sources. Each one takes a lot of work to apply for. They're not always successful in the bids. And so many of these grants, the problem is that they're short term. They've got to be spent within a short period of time. There's no consistency. There's no certainty of continuation funding or any further funding. So what they really find great difficulty with is to instigate projects that can support training and apprenticeships. So some of these projects are supporting quite a lot of jobs, but not in a way that is really building the workforce in a skilled workforce in the way that we need to see that, the way that we need to see that being built. One encouraging thing that we have discovered recently is that whereas almost all construction and retrofit work and repairs and maintenance on council stock has been outsourced in recent years, and the standard of that has been very noticeably reduced through the outsourcing, a lot of corner cutting, but a lot of these jobs have now been brought back in-house. So that is, I think there's been a little bit of a corner turned in terms of the council accepting the need to try and build up its own in-house workforce again. The bit that we're actually quite excited about is that we, quite a long time ago now, almost a year ago, one of our affiliated branches put a motion, tabled a motion, which you can find at the end of the retrofit document that I've linked to, and it's a motion calling on trade union branches to attempt to convene a coalition to get all these different groups around the table, the unions, the council, the community groups, and to actually have a really big push on this. And that motion was passed by the branch. It was also passed by Leeds Trades Council, and then with slight modifications was also passed by the Unite Area Activist Committee, which is a more difficult thing to do because the Activist Committee is always more conservative than the Trades Council and some of the branches. From there, it was taken to by the Yorkshire and Humber political officer to the regional committee, and it's now with the National Executive Committee. And from that, it appears the person who first tabled that motion in their branch has now been asked to attend a meeting with Gail Cartmale, who's the Assistant General Secretary of Unite, and is also now President of the TUC. So our little motion that we for a long time didn't think was going anywhere is now actually sitting with the National Executive of Unite, and potentially with the National TUC conference, but fingers crossed about that. But I do have to say, and I will round up here, but I think it's important to note that we have had some pushback also on the document, and the reason for that is because although it's not the primary target, but it is mentioned in the document that we are critical of carbon capture and storage as a way of mitigating emissions from fossil fuels. And of course, carbon capture and storage is a very big part of the proposals for industrial development in the Humber region and also in the Teesside region. It's tied in with it's a kind of thing that ties together a lot of the proposals for decarbonising heavy industries, the production of primary materials, but also tying it in with continuation of burning natural gas to produce hydrogen and using carbon capture and storage as a way to supposedly decarbonise that. And we know that if CCS works at all, it's not going to be at least until the middle of the next decade. And even then, there are going to be a lot of fugitive emissions that are going to continue. So we're not really, we're suspicious of that route, to say the least. So it really brings us into the centre of a controversy that's going on within the trade union movement. So if people have opinions on that, might be useful to air later on, but I will leave it there because I'm really conscious of the time. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ellen. That was terrific. You've really enlightened us about how your campaign is moving forward. It sounds really exciting. So thank you very much. The document you mentioned, will you attach it to the chat for us? Because I think there might be people in this meeting that haven't seen it.
I'll put that whole thing that I've just read out into the chat with the links, yes.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, now we're going to go and listen to Stuart Graham from Glasgow Trade Union Council. We are interested to find out how they're getting on with their campaign because they're further ahead than we are. So I look forward to hearing what your thoughts are just now, Stuart, and how things are moving forward.
Cheers, Claire. And thanks very much, everyone, again, for the invitation. I'd come along, I think it was December or January, to speak about COP26. And it's what I would open with that because I suppose the impetus or the motivation for Glasgow Trades Council to be doing, whether it's the retrofitting stuff or whether it's the public transport stuff, and you guys in Edinburgh are luckier than us to have publicly owned buses. But it was about using the political leverage, the spotlight that is going to be afforded with the 2 weeks in November that Glasgow will be under, to try and actually leverage policies that are going to be in workers' interests and in communities' interests. Because, and I suppose Ellen had spoken, I've known Ellen, I think, probably for about a year now, and come across the document that she had written and had led on through the COP26 Trade Union Caucus, which in turn got us thinking about, okay, we had already at that point had the Free Our City campaign for free public transport, for free buses developed, but we were also looking at how else can we pull in policies and campaigning issues that will connect to COP26 and will connect to everybody, not niche members of our niche sections of the community, but everybody. So transport's one, housing's the other. Now, I suppose whenever you consider how every local authority is currently operating to try and develop a circular economy model, and Glasgow as the host city for COP26 is particularly emphasising the circular economy model. Now, this a properly conducted meet that demand. Unfortunately, we don't think that that's currently being pitched at that level or scale. Now, what's become dead apparent throughout this, so whenever we've been trying to deal with some municipal things, they are sitting with the local authority or the city council. However, see when it comes to the funding that is going to be applied for retrofitting, now in the west of Scotland, that applies to the Glasgow City region. So that's Glasgow plus 7 local authorities. I don't know how that replicates itself on the East Coast, but I would imagine you'll have the Edinburgh City region or something comparable, whatever. So what then triggered our interest in this further was Jen McCary, who is the chair of Glasgow Trades Council, had a place on Glasgow's COVID Economic Recovery Group. And as they were coming towards the end of that series of meetings about how to restart the economy after the pandemic and the amount of people who had been either unemployed or furloughed, then, you know, realistically, they were looking to target the majority, if not all of this funding at SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises. Now, that's not to detract from good, positive SMEs that have good terms and conditions and that have union recognition. However, what we know from investment in the private sector and from entrusting the scale of this type of task to the private sector is that it can fail. It can be done on the cheap. It can be, excuse me for this, but it can be just a pile of shite, because you could end up with retrofitting companies trying to sell a particular model just for the purpose of a market, you know, for the monetization aspect of it, rather than this actually fitting your property. And when Ellen had referred to deep retrofitting, that's contained within the proposal that we have in mind. A deep retrofit approach, and either the creation or of a public sector in order to deliver this at the scale required, or the expansion of, because we have city building in Glasgow, and city building is held up as a model by, you know, many academics around the UK. It's, you know, it's an arm's length organisation that's controlled by Glasgow City Council, and it has contracts with the majority of the housing associations, but it's publicly owned. And this is the crucial aspect of it. It's about keeping the money in the city. See, if money goes to SMEs or goes to multinational institutions, then their first priority is to their shareholders, not to the city within which they are operating, not to the people who they employ, and not to their customers. It's to their shareholders in the very, very first instance. So any profit gets stripped out. That'll do nothing for any city, because what we want is we know that this is even the money that is being proposed around this isn't enough. So in terms of how are you going to convince people that this is going to be a level of worthwhile expenditure, then you need to be able to articulate the social protections that come with that. So that would be jobs on a level never ever seen before, because if it's done right, this is an army of people who are required. You know, cheaper energy, particularly when we're talking about working class families. If we can create levels of insulation, different types of heating systems, infrastructure that doesn't currently exist, this is going to create jobs. But also, particularly given that the construction industry is rife with gender segregation, insecure work, and blacklisting, why would we want to give contracts to these companies? Why would we not want to retain public control, democratic control of this type of scheme? Because, you know, I mean, it absolutely boggles me. Maybe boggles is the wrong word. It surprises me every time I think about this, about the scale of the task that is actually ahead of us. And someone's just put in the chat as well about the health benefits. There are so many, multiple benefits from this. Families that are living, that are choosing between heating in the winter and eating, or choosing between, paying an electricity bill and being able to afford a bus pass. So I'm not going to belabor the point in terms of, I think everybody gets this. So what are we doing about it? Right. So to begin with, we have provisionally identified a date of the 28th of August, which is a Saturday. We are holding a retrofitting conference that we're currently organising. Haven't got everybody confirmed yet, but we're looking to bring in speakers from Finland or Denmark, because I'm currently going through contacts, ITUC contacts in the European Federation of Builders and Woodworkers, in order to get somebody who can speak because there have been successful retrofitting projects at scale in both Denmark and Finland. And I appreciate that there's maybe some natural features like, you know, naturally heated wells or something that it might be specific to particular parts of the country or particular parts of those countries. But we want to hear how it's been done and how it's been done at scale. So we're planning on holding this conference, but also inviting Francis Stewart from the STUC would speak from STUC perspective on the green jobs aspect of this. I've invited Commonweal. Now, Craig DL has spoken at a few events that I've been at, and Craig has confirmed, but he's also come back to suggest it might be more appropriate that a practitioner who has implemented this at a micro level in Scotland might be a more appropriate speaker. So I've still to have a wee bit of dialogue with Craig about that. And also Suzanne and/or Ellen from the Campaign Against Climate Change. This isn't about being policy heavy. This is about essentially saying, here's 3 varying Green New Deal documents that have come from democratic structures that are looking to help redesign the economy. Because whenever you mention just transition to anybody, and I'm even people that I walk my dog with in the morning that I consider that would be educated to the level they understand it, and they don't know what just transition means, apart from it's something to do with oil and gas and reducing carbon. And I think in terms of that definition has failed to a certain extent. And I think we need to start pushing just transition as being a just transformation of society and what that actually means in terms of gaining social protections. Because people will hear on the news and politicians will bang a drum about how much it will cost. But see if people actually understand what those social protections look like, what benefits they will bring to them financially, mental or physical health, warm, cool, whatever aspect of this. But it is going to fit into a circular economy model that ties in with community wealth building, that ties in with transport, that ties into the whole other aspects that are all trying to be worked together at once. So the reason we're having this event on the 28th, and the idea is to have a kind of a plenary, an opportunity for decent breakouts and a final plenary. So we're talking probably kind of 2 to 3 hour session with breaks. The reason that we're doing this is because we found out through our own research that Glasgow City Region has commissioned an 80 grand feasibility study, which is due mid-September, start of October, which is just in time for COP, because this is going to be presented not only to Glasgow City Council and Glasgow City Region, and not only to Holyrood, but to Westminster. So see if they're paying 80 grand for a report that is going to multiple levels of government, that we're making an assumption that this could be a potential template that may or may not be good or bad. However, what we want to know is, and Jen has been writing to the city region in order to find out, because the lead is the head of West Dunbartonshire Council. I think it's Jonathan Neal, but I might have that name wrong. So we want to find out who are the consultants, what are they actually being asked to do, and when can we see this feasibility study? Because we want to have this conference to inform ourselves and educate ourselves from a workers' perspective and bridge that gap with the community. But we also want to have a follow-up, get this guy who's the lead for Glasgow City Council in to speak to it, and we want to basically poke holes in the proposal, in the feasibility study, as we do as trade unionists, and propose a counter proposal if we can work one up in time. Because I suppose whenever we were looking for the kind of hook, particularly around what is going to be the legacy around this, because again, people need to understand this in relatively simple terms and understand what a legacy is going to be. See if my granddaughter can get a job in building and retrofitting because the infrastructure currently exists, and because there isn't blacklisting and there isn't gender segregation, but it's open to all. See if people are talking about this as, oh, I'm waiting for the next round because they're 3 streets away and I can expect whenever this is going to happen. Then that's the type of positive approach we want. We don't want this done piecemeal and someone waiting years and years, or for it to be done for those, or, you know, it can only be done with folk with certain types of tenure. Climate change is going to hit everybody the same. Doesn't matter whether you're a socially rented tenant, private rented tenant, you live in a mortgage property, outright bought, whatever. Climate change is coming to hit us all. So I think everybody needs to have the same options for that. I appreciate there might be some level of contribution towards that, but that's for working out further down the line. What we need is action now and a policy platform that we can actually abstract and replicate around the country. I'll stop talking there. And I have to say, guys, I'm really sorry. I've got something that's come up family-wise, so I can't stick about for the rest of the meeting. But thank you very much for the invitation to speak.
Query, you're on mute.
Thank you, Ian. Well done, Stuart. Thanks very much for speaking to us tonight, and we appreciate your time, even though you've got to dash. Good luck with getting your conference organised, and we look forward to, I'm sure many of us will be there.
Just Carmen has put details of their retrofitting conference. Yes, once they're confirmed, and also Live and Rent has been invited. I've been speaking to Nick Jury and George. I can't remember George's last name because he lives down the road from me, Lavery, about getting a Live and Rent representative at that as well. So there will definitely be Live and Rent input within that conference as well. Okay, cheers, guys. Bye.
Right, magic. Thanks very much, Stuart. Okay, everyone, I'd like to invite Linda Clarke to speak to us next. Linda's from the University of Westminster, so if you can unmute, Linda.
Yes, I have, and thank you for inviting me. I just want to say just a bit about myself, because I'm on the Green Jobs Alliance steering group, which is a alliance of trade unions and environmental groups across the country, really, but including Unite and UCU and NEU and various other unions. And I've also worked for many years with the European Federation of Building and Woodworkers, including a project we did which called VET4LET, Vocational Education and Training for Low Energy Construction in 10 European countries. And currently I'm engaged with the Canadian building trade unions, trying to embed climate literacy into all the building trades in Canada, but we're producing examples from the rest of Europe. So that's my background, and I'm very happy to stay in contact. I gave a rather similar talk that I was invited to give. I live in Islington, to Islington Council a couple of weeks ago. And I hope that we can establish some kind of retrofit national campaign as we go forward. But I'm very happy to follow on from Stuart, because I'm going to really compliment what he was saying. And I have a presentation. I try and be as short as possible, and I hope you'll stop me if I go on for longer than 7-8 minutes. So I'll bring it up if that's okay, if I can find it. Here it is. So a just transition. Yeah, we all talk about a just transition. I think one of the problems is it comes in various different forms and different approaches. And one approach is to see it very much in terms of market solutions, carbon pricing, where Labour doesn't really play much of a role, and it's very technology dominated. Another approach, which is perhaps the most common, is to look at it in terms of what's termed ecological modernisation, focusing on retraining, proactive investment, and with Labour playing a bit more of a role. And then really what Stuart was pleading for, and which I would plead for, a radical transformation, because if we look at the state of the construction industry, that's certainly what we need for retrofit, which involves integrated, regulated energy supply, broader occupational profiles, high qualification levels, and where Labour plays a very active role. This is to give you a picture of just the problem we face. I mean, Britain, France are really countries which face even greater problem than many other countries because of the high number of older dwellings, which are very inefficient in terms of energy So to put this in a policy context, now construction is responsible for 40% of CO2 end use emissions. And the whole energy efficient targets are about airtight building envelopes and on-site renewables to create what we call nearly zero energy building. Now, one problem with trying to achieve this, and this is what this diagram is showing, what's called the performance gap between design intention and actual achievement, which is less in something like passive housing. But in this was a project looking at the installation of heat pumps in a large number of dwellings, and it just showed just how and this was pre-occupancy, so before the occupants came and made things even more difficult. It just showed that in fact there may be a well-intentioned design, but it's a tall order to actually meet that. And one of the big problems is the training of the workforce. And it was for that reason that the European Commission had a 30-country investigation into Build Up Schools, it was called, into the problems of construction skills. And they showed that really to achieve zero energy building, one of the big problems was the weakness of vocational education systems, because they need to be interdisciplinary. You need to get over the interfaces, and you need a great deal of coordination and an understanding of the building as a holistic, as an integrated system. This is yet another diagram to show the performance gap. In this case, it's to do with insulation. And as you see, the purple is really showing what happened in practice. The blue columns are what's designed, and we see the same problem of a performance gap. So what is it that contributes to energy efficiency? I mean, if we look at the building envelope occupations, one key problem is that many workers don't have formal qualifications in that area. Perhaps worse in England than in Scotland, I would say. Another problem is that the construction industry is so factional, with these professional silos, divided trades, a very fragmented labour process, particularly because of contracting, subcontracting, subcontracting, agency labour, which really stops the kind of teamwork you really need. And these diagrams show just where the heat loss is. It's through those interfaces between the roofer and the carpenter or the electrician, and that's really what the problem we need to address. But of course, we have a construction industry. 49% of the workforce is so-called self-employed. 95 to 98% of firms are small or micro, and that's meant that there is really lacking a training infrastructure, or a very weak training infrastructure in the private sector. There's been a dramatic decline that's been going on now for the last few decades in training and apprenticeship, what's called employer disengagement. But really, I think it's because of this lack of a training infrastructure. Many of young people try and get a training and end up full-time in FE colleges, but then can't get the work experience. So there's severe skill shortages, especially now that many Polish workers are returning back, plus a kind of emphasis on only achieving up to level 2. Now that is really insufficient for any retrofit program. I should just say that the retrofit coordinator qualification is at the moment being designed, and that's a level 5. So I think you cannot argue for anything less than level 3 for any of the occupations involved in retrofitting. But of course, there's a great recruitment crisis at the moment. Aging workforce, few young people, a tiny female workforce, only less than 3%, and very often poor employment, and as Stuart said, blacklisting, etc., that's rife in the industry. So what we need, and this is why we need such a transformation, it's no good just concentrating on skills. It needs a great deal of knowledge, in order to, for instance, how to bridge thermal bridges, physics, material behavior, competencies, high precision, good communication, and know-how. So that really requires a much more comprehensive, high standard vocational education system where you have climate thermal literacy embedded. Now, often I hear in England, particularly because I think that it's not so conscious as Scotland is of really what good training means. Often you hear that you get the impression that an insulator could be trained up in a few weeks. Well, Canada, it takes nearly 4 years. Germany, it's similar to be an insulator. So I think we have to take these kind of examples and really say, look, we have to do it properly. We need to develop broad occupational profiles, not narrow trade-based skills, and to be able to develop transversal abilities and to bridge this awful gap between professions and operatives. Integrated teamwork, regulating the subcontract chain, involving particularly the trade unions, and as well also being inclusive so that women and ethnic minorities are no longer excluded from the industry. So now I'm just going to finish with a couple of examples which include Glasgow. I'm very glad Stuart mentioned Glasgow City Council. This is Wakefield, an example from Wakefield. This is new build, it's not retrofit though, but why it's particularly interesting is it was also built by direct labour. Part of the site was, and this is an ideal to think about with a large, if you're doing a fuel poverty estate, for instance, part of the site was set aside just for training with Leeds College of Building, whom, of course, others working with. And it was green technologies, very high level, in fact, probably even higher than passive house and trade union involvement. And this is Glasgow City Council, which we've written a report on. So if anybody wants to see that, it's a whole account of what Glasgow City Council's been doing. Of course, that's the local authority plus a housing association plus joint trade union council, but also owned by the council, and has developed what's called the Glasgow House, which is highly energy efficient. It employs at the moment 2,200 workers directly, and any subcontracting is really quite carefully monitored and regulated. There's a manufacturing arm, which I think is wonderful, which employs, again, a few hundred, 60% of whom have disabilities. It's highly unionized. There's a very large scale Queensley training centre and workshops for low energy construction. And the social housing, it concentrates on social housing. I've shown that the new build that's been going on, and plus the manufacturing. But if you look on the right, this estate was a retrofitted estate, a fuel poverty estate. They managed to reduce the energy costs by 2/3 there. And it was through using a very large, and I put that, the bottom picture is the large air source heat pump unit that was built for these 350 units as part of the retrofit program for them. So this is Glasgow, its underlying dynamic, a long established direct labour organisation, strong trade union involvement, not for profit, and actually increasing Scottish government involvement. So I've finished there, but just to conclude, the picture here, in fact, is a retrofit in Camden, a passive house retrofit. But just to conclude that I think we shouldn't just talk about job creation and green jobs, but this is really a chance to transform and improve employment and working conditions in construction. It's not just about skill development, but about knowledge and competencies and upgrading programs to give energy literacy to the entire workforce if we're going to meet targets. I think we need to separate out, though, the training for the existing workforce and for those young people coming into the industry to achieve quality and to overcome the performance gap. Much greater involvement of the unions and the workforce if you're going to get team working and breaking down the hierarchies, and of course inclusivity, recruiting those who've been excluded if we're going to achieve this wide-scale zero energy retrofitting program. So I'll finish there. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
No, thank you, Linda. That was really fascinating and quite mind-blowing. It's such a huge thing, isn't it, to get everybody involved in creating this multidisciplinary workforce that you talk about. But I'm sure lots of people are going to have lots of questions for you later. Our final speaker was going to be Maria from Living Rent. However, she's not able to join us tonight. However, we do have somebody called Emma Saunders who has volunteered to take Maria's place instead. So I'd like to invite you to come and speak to us just now, Emma.
Yeah, great to see everyone tonight, and yeah, really great to have all that in-depth knowledge and also like really important ambition. Like I think sometimes it's hard to like, yeah, feel ambitious in this climate, and I think it's on the contrary incredibly needed. And so it's wonderful to feel like there's people wanting to be ambitious and like dreaming that radical transformation that is needed. So just as said, Maria can't make it today, and so I've cobbled like a very few points, and I'm speaking. I know that there's several Living Rent members in the room as well, so feel free to add and stuff that I have missed. So a bit of the context, I think, Living Rent members across the country, just like what Stuart was saying, recognise that the COP26 is a great opportunity to also put more pressure around the Scottish Government and local councils, especially with the local council elections coming, around what would be a radical approach to housing and how that can like address a lot of challenges around climate change. And so there is a real hope to leverage policies at the local and national level to achieve that. A bit around the context, more around the tenants' perspective, since Living Rent is a tenants' union. So 57% of private housing are on EPC, so Energy Performance Certificate D or below, which means that that's in the worst bands. And in the social and public housing, that's 47%. That's still huge. There's 25% of households in Scotland who are estimated to be in fuel poverty, and 11% who are estimated to be in extreme fuel poverty. And that's something that, Living Rent members see across cities, be that in Muirhouse in Edinburgh, where quite a few tenants pay as much as 10 quid a day on their energy bills, or in Glasgow in both new builds and old buildings, where again members will be paying between £5 and £15 per day on energy efficiency, and those are social housing tenants, which just screams of a huge problem. And yeah, I think it is both an issue around fuel poverty, but also just a lot around health, as poor housing entails a lot of damp and moldness. And so I think the demands and the hope that members have been sort of bringing together, and those are still very much in the formation, is both at national level, and that means sort of around building standards, as some of the speakers were talking about here, means around refurbishment and like actually a ambitious plan there. I think my understanding is that the Scottish Government has committed £1.2 billion in the next 5 years across Scotland. If Leeds needs £8 billion for one council, imagine what that means across Scotland, and imagine if 1.2 billion is enough. So the scale of the investment needs to be really thought through. And I guess, and that's maybe something to think through that hasn't been mentioned as much tonight, and that, Living Rent members feel really strongly about, is that we believe that tenants should not pay for refurbishment, And that means that we should not see renovictions, which are social or private homes being renovated, but as a result, either evicting the tenants to do so, or which is green evictions, and that doesn't happen as much, but more what we fear, renovictions, whereby rents are increased afterwards and people are priced out of their homes because they've been renovated, and tenants are being asked to foot the bill of renovation. And that will happen if there's not enough funding in the Scottish Government in part. And as a result, it will be social tenants, it will be public tenants, it will be private tenants footing the bill of meeting energy performance. And that's something that we're really, really concerned about, and that we think that any just and radical transition needs to be very aware of. The other thing that I guess another concern, and people have been mentioning the air source heat pumps. A lot of members, and maybe that's an anecdotal evidence here, are very concerned about air source heat pumps, which they see as a way sort of improving the standards on paper rather than improving the standards in practice. And I think, Linda, when you were showing that sort of difference between what is expected energy performance improvement through putting in air source heat pumps versus the effective one, and that it's a real gap. And at the moment, there's quite a few tenants who've been forced to put in air source heat pumps because it improves the energy performance of the building on paper, and as a result, social landlords are meeting their targets on paper, but it doesn't improve their fuel bill. On the contrary, it increases their fuel bills because other energy improvements, which might be windows, which are more efficient and more important, are not being done instead. And so there is this prioritization of air source heat pumps as the easiest way of greening your building when it doesn't work in practice. Tenants are footing the bill, and it's creating quite a lot of concerns because it takes a lot of space. It means for a lot of people, they're losing their balconies. It does a lot of background noise. It means that for a lot of people, their quality of life is reduced. And so I guess that's another sort of really strong aspect, is any transition needs to be democratic and accountable, and tenants need to be involved. If their homes are going to be changed for their own good, they should have a voice in what that means, and that imposing stuff from the top is going to create a lot of backlash, and it's going to work against like our vision of what does a transition look like that is working, like one based on working class communities and speaking to tenants and residents across Scotland. And so if rent controls, democracy are two big things that we really want to put. And sorry, I say rent controls is to avoid the renoviction, and so make sure that no cost of renovation is put on tenants. The last thing we see as another sort of maybe softer measure, but still incredibly important, is giving councils greater powers of enforcement. So at the moment, councils could enforce on private landlords that are not meeting energy performance certificates of E. They could enforce a fine of £5,000. Most councils don't have the enough officers, they don't have enough resources to use those powers of enforcement effectively. And so I think there is a sense by a lot of members of both needing to put in place a program of refurbishment, put in place better building standards, but also put in place regulations that are there to ensure that the cost of renovations is not borne by tenants, ensure that there's enforcement and penalties if landlords don't meet the standards, and ensure that tenants are consulted and that landlords are accountable to tenants' needs, when refurbishment happens.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Emma, putting those points together for us this evening at such short notice. Really appreciate them. I would like to open the meeting now to invite comments or discussion on the content that we've heard about tonight. If you have any questions, please put your hand up using Zoom or write in the chat. If you don't want to say anything, I'll read it out for you. If you have questions, I'm sure our guests will try to answer those for you. Okay. So I just have a little look. Ian, I see your hand up. Ian's from Unison here in Edinburgh. Can I invite you to join the discussion, Ian?
Thanks, Claire, and thanks to all the speakers. Very informative. There's a couple of points I'll very quickly run through. Both myself and my wife were members of Greenpeace in our early 20s, well, sorry, mid-20s and 30s, and I remember putting proposals forward about using our used service oil for heating and lighting in garages and depots 20 odd years ago, and it was cast aside mainly because a trade unionist put it forward, and that probably would have saved an absolute fortune. It's interesting that we, over the last few years, have built 2 super depots and a new headquarters, and not one of these buildings even has a solar panel on it until the last year and a half. And this was something that I've been raising with our senior management for some time now. But I really wanted to speak about a couple of other points that have came to fruition recently. The Edinburgh Climate Change Strategy document for 2030 is out for consultation. It's a document that's about 50 odd pages. I've got to admit I haven't read it all. I have attended a workshop and I have listened to the Chief Executive's vlog, and I'm not surprised that it doesn't say anything about consultation with the trade unions. It mentions consultation with just about everybody else, but if you think that the vast majority of Edinburgh's housing stock, all 22,000 plus properties, was all pre-built before 1999, when asbestos was actually was stopped from being used in the construction industry. The one issue that we're going to have in Edinburgh about retrofitting council property is actually making sure that it's safe and the asbestos is not damaged and is properly removed. And I've got to say that Unison have put a stop to the current draft asbestos policy being recommended for approval last month, and it's going to go ahead into committee next month with a recommendation to approve. I have actually responded to that policy for 3 years now, because I don't believe we have the resources to be fully compliant with asbestos regulations. Even more so now that we've got rid of our, well, sorry, not rid, wrong word. They have disbanded our asbestos team. And there's also an internal audit going on. There's an FM audit going on at the same time. What annoys me as well about this strategy is that no reference has been made to the people who are actually staying in these properties, because the vast majority of council-owned property in Edinburgh now is in areas of deprivation, Craigmore, Granton, Bolton. It's all tenement accommodation. So you've got unemployment, you've got alcohol, you've got drug, you've got a lot of people that are maybe looking for, to come in as asylum seekers in these areas, and they're put in accommodation which is sometimes substandard, or you have multiple families living in accommodation that isn't fit for purpose. They are not being consulted about this strategy, and that's an area that doesn't get engaged in a lot of things. And I do know that because my professional job prior to going to Unison on a secondment for 4 years was a private rented services officer. Another thing I wanted to point out, when I left that job to go to Unison on secondment, part of that job was looking at the empty homes in Edinburgh. And at that stage, we had found 300. I now believe that it's double that. And what we should be doing is looking at actually bringing that accommodation back into council housing stock, making sure that it's affordable, making sure that it's a quality standard, that people, are not going to be ill. And there's a lot of opportunity there. The other thing that ties in with that is the fact that if you look at Edinburgh now, the amount of green space that's being built on is absolutely atrocious. There is not going to be any space for our kids and our grandchildren to actually be able to have a proper, physical opportunities to go and like we did when we were growing up, play football, run about, go to play parks. There's so much housing now. I mean, I moved out to near the borders, and the village that I stay in has been wrapped in new housing in the last 5 years. There was one other thing a couple of other things that I wanted to say, and it comes back to something that I think Graham and Linda have mentioned as well, and that's about job opportunities. Because we've just awarded in Edinburgh 2 companies a contract worth £180 million over 7 years with the possibility of a 3-year extension. Now, Unison and Unite argued that our in-house property maintenance department should have been given the opportunity to at least get part of that, if not 3/4 there. It could have provided job opportunities for trades and, more importantly, for apprenticeships. That option was, cast aside, and Mighty and Stanger, another company, got that. And it's an astronomical amount of money. There is also, in Edinburgh, what we have to get away from is, I've been with Edinburgh Council for a very long time. And when I joined, we had full employment. Now we have become very agency orientated. And it's utterly unacceptable. The time, even pre-COVID, we were paying between 1.5 £2 million a month to agencies for agency workers. And that could be put into full employment and redirected in fitting out these houses and fitting out properties to a decent standard. And not just that, we need to get our commercial buildings up to standard as well. Sorry,
Okay.
Claire, I get really annoyed by things like that.
No, thanks very much for your input, Ian.
My camera doesn't work as well, so sorry.
All right, I see Fiona's hand up. Des, yours was up, but have you taken yours down? Yeah, maybe Ian's said what you were going to say. So we'll go to Fiona, please, then Sarah, then Mandy, please. So Fiona from Aberdeen.
Yes, hi there. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I just wanted to comment a little bit. So Ellen, spoke about the thousands of new jobs we need to create. And Stuart also mentioned how momentous the scale of the job in front of us is. My concern is that I don't feel at the moment we're talking with a single trade union voice or strategy. So we have, we could see at STUC this year, gas for domestic heating was still being seen as a sort of a sustainable way forward. And my concern is if we're trying to transition, if we are still maintaining jobs in the oil and gas section at the same time, or sector, at the same time as these green jobs are being created, where there's an overlap. You know, it seems to me that we're working at different paces, and I do see that as being a bit of a problem, and I'd be interested to hear how people think we can get beyond that and unite, sort of like the you know, the union voice.
Okay, many thanks for that, Fiona. I'll go straight to Sarah now and maybe give some of our speakers a chance to think about your question, if that's okay. Sarah, can I invite you in?
Thanks very much, Claire. Just to say to our speakers, I'm one of our members of the Scottish Parliament, and my background is actually in town planning. And before I came back to the Parliament, I actually did some lecturing at university about energy efficiency and renewables and planning, and also did some work with some of the housing associations in Scotland. And it just feels to me that this is the campaign we're talking about tonight is just such a no-brainer. We've got the climate emergency, which is now happening. We've got the issue about the fuel poverty that several speakers have mentioned. I mean, to still have a quarter of our population living in fuel poverty is just appalling. And for some groups in rural areas, or pensioners in particularly, that rate is much higher, or people on very low incomes as well, if they've got kids or relatives who have got disabilities, it's even worse for them. So that there's lots of social reasons why we need to do this. But the thing that I think quite a few of you have talked about, which I think is absolutely central, is you could create a lot of really good quality jobs here. And that's why I think we should push it really hard in Edinburgh. When we were doing our manifesto stuff, we had to look at the energy efficiency work, and you know, it potentially creates 7,500 good quality jobs. And it's the training opportunities that I think was mentioned earlier that you've been looking at in Leeds. I think that's absolutely critical. So that Edinburgh College, for example, has got courses that are available. And then also so you've got companies that are signed up to doing proper apprenticeships. So not just a very short apprenticeship, but the length of time. And I'll bet it would scare some companies to tell them it's 4 or 5 years to be properly trained. But if you're thinking about it, installing heat pumps, solar panels, solar water, sorting out, potentially doing heat networks like they've got in Aberdeen with the community heat network project up there. I think the thing that frustrates me sometimes is this does work. It's just we're not doing it everywhere, and that's the bit that I hope the energy will come out of tonight, because we've got the Edinburgh Solar Co-op, which is putting money back into local communities. It's not going out of the city. It's not going to private companies. Aberdeen's got its heat network. North Ayrshire has now got its own solar farm that it's building. And as speakers have said, we've got, you know, hundreds of thousands of houses we need to sort out in Edinburgh, never mind the whole of Scotland. So I think we need a twin track campaign for the Scottish government, the SNP government, to put more money into this, but also to have funding for councils. And I think the powers that were talked about earlier, for Emma from Living Rent, issues about private rents being controlled. We proposed that in the last Parliament. And so it needs a joined up approach, but I think getting some energy behind this in the run up to COP26 would be great. But as others have said, we've got the council elections next year. So making sure there's funding for councils and having that ambition, it feels to me, is absolutely critical. And making sure the trade unions are involved so that we create good quality, long-standing jobs out of this, as well as tackling fuel poverty and climate change. It is such a win-win. So I'm very keen to work with you, Claire, over the next few months as we get this lifted up and we get this a campaign, hopefully in Edinburgh, but also in other cities as well. Thanks.
Magic. Thank you. Really heartened to hear what you're saying, Sarah. Thanks for that. We'll now go to Councillor Mandy Watt, and after that, we'll hear from Mary Alexander and then Pete, please. So, Mandy.
Thanks. That was great. For anybody who wasn't there at the start, I'm Edinburgh Labour's House and Homelessness and Fair Work Vice Convener. Listening to Ian Mullen from Unison, it was really quite interesting because he put his finger on so many of the dichotomies and the challenges that we're facing. People want to keep green space, but they want an end to homelessness. So they want us to build houses, especially energy efficient ones, but they don't want it built on green spaces. So that's a massive challenge. He spoke about how retrofitting, there'll be low-hanging fruit where it's not desperately difficult to do the retrofitting. He then spoke about other buildings where the technical challenges and observing health and safety at work are really significant. You know, as he was saying around asbestos and other hazardous materials, hazardous working conditions. Another dichotomy that's facing us is one of our speakers spoke about hierarchies to be broken down. We've long supported the position of Unite and Unison members in Edinburgh Council that they do not want to be general building technicians, etc., etc. They're skilled people with specific skills, and they want that recognised, and that's a really fair observation from them. So how do we move from there to breaking down hierarchies? I think that that's a really very difficult issue, you know, from a trade union perspective. Some of the solutions that we're looking at in Edinburgh, not for the retrofits, for the new builds, that would address equalities issues and on is pre-manufactured housing, where it takes a modular approach. So it's actually sections are built in factories where the working conditions for women and especially are much better than on a building site. So we're looking at that, looking what would be possible. That's particularly in relation to all the development that we're hoping to do down at West Granton. So I think that there's a lot of things there. I think Ian also mentioned the contract that was placed, and Mary Alexander will probably have something to say about this, which would be great. That wasn't for housing, that was an estates contract that was placed for other council buildings, schools, etc., etc. Interestingly, there is no minimum value of work that has to be placed against that contract, because Cammy Dare Labour leader slammed the brakes on it, so that they couldn't place it if that was the case. We put up a motion at last full council for a programme of insourcing on that contract to be developed, and we're going to be in consultation about that. So that's very specific. So these are all issues that we're grappling with. Another issue that's you know, you're talking about triple glazing windows and solar panels. There's a worldwide shortage of glass, and you can't use recycled glass at the moment for windows and solar panels. You can't. So there's a huge dichotomy around, you know, strip mining the Earth's resources to do this retrofitting and building and all these windows and solar panels. So these are all things that we're taking very seriously, that we're trying to balance, the pros, the cons. We need to get these projects off the grounds if we're to succeed in fighting climate change.
Okay, Mandy.
Yeah.
Thanks. I'll move on
and things will take time.
Okay.
So yeah, if people can answer those questions, if some of our speakers can answer those issues, that'd be fabulous. Okay. Thank you so much. Thanks for your patience, Claire.
No worries. Thanks, Mandy. Mary, would you like to come in just now?
Yeah, and I don't want to repeat what you know, Ian said, and you know, some of the stuff that Sarah said, as well as Mandy there. So, I mean, there's just so much in what we've discussed tonight, and thanks to the speakers for the, you know, insights that they've given us. I'm co-chairing a construction inquiry looking at commissioning and procurement and fair work, and how that is operating in local authorities at the moment. And it's there's just so much of this agenda and some of the stuff that Linda was talking about, you know, the self-employment, the severe skills shortages. There's just so much common ground and opportunities there, as everyone has said. And you know, so I just think it's really good that we're having this discussion, and that I share Ian's frustration with the Edinburgh climate change strategy. I've written to the council 3 times now to try and get a meeting to discuss it, and there's just so much to discuss as we've seen tonight. So I won't go on, but I do think that, you know, we need to be focused on, you know, what we're going to campaign on, and you know, link up with the appropriate bodies and really push ahead of COP26, and Unite will be behind that.
Many thanks, Mary. I think we're going to have to just do the last 5 minutes of action points, but we'll hear from Pete and then we'll go to that section of our meeting. Thanks, Pete.
Okay, thanks, Claire. Yeah, this is just such an important discussion, and I think the fact that there's beginning to be retrofitting campaigns across a whole variety of different locations is important. One of the things that I'd just like to pick up on very briefly, because we're running out of time, but you know, Fiona mentioned it, and I think Ellen alluded to it in her talk as well. But one of the really important things about the retrofitting campaign and campaigns for district heating, which I think are also really relevant to Edinburgh, are that we can kind of shift the balance in the direction of a kind of worker-led, trade union-led approach, which has got real tangible benefits for both the people who end up living in the homes and in terms of jobs as well. And I think alongside that, we do need to have a critical view of what, in a sense, both the UK government and the Scottish government are signed up to an oil and gas-led policy at the moment, where rather than concentrating on home insulation and on district heating and public transport and things like that, we're looking at as much like the status quo as possible and shifting toward using gas generated by electrolysis and for using hydrogen. And one of the things about that is it's so much more inefficient than using electricity directly. So if you go to the electrolysis approach to generating hydrogen, you're using about 7 times as much electricity as you would if you were just using electricity directly. You know, so I think there's a whole set of discussions we have to have as a movement that we can push through as alongside these really practical discussions about retrofitting that are going to be critically important over the next 2 or 3 years.
Many thanks for that, Pete. And I think you've possibly got our first action point there is for us to continue these discussions as we move forward. But I wonder if anybody would like to come in with an action point that we can take from tonight's meeting.
Where could I add one other thing, just on the Edinburgh climate strategy?
Okay.
And that is that when I attended the workshops on this, I asked the question specifically, and I know that Mary and a colleague for Unite will be interested in this. I asked specifically around the training for staff who are maybe in a trade at the moment, specifically around our fleet and other trades. And I was told that there was an element of retraining put into the strategy document, but it only involved the technological side of things, i.e. computing systems, you know, things that weren't going to address the potential impact on trades people, even coming down to the likes of parks and green space, where we could end up using automatic lawnmowers that have sensors on them rather than having people pushing a lawnmower or driving a tractor, or, you know, carrying out a service on a vehicle. And that needs to be addressed. And the other thing, and I'm glad that the Councillor Watt's in attendance tonight, because I'm absolutely open to speaking to any of our councillors about this. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Ian. Okay, we'll go to Des and then Emma, please. Des first, please.
Yes, just to talk about or mention what I think are the main short-term action points I'm talking about between now and the end of August. And to me, out of the meeting tonight, there's 3 action points that I'm going to take up. I think Edinburgh TUC will take up. One is that we have this meeting which has been offered by Councillor Watts with the City Council officials and other councils to discuss really what the points being made tonight. And I hope that can be organised in the next fortnight, and obviously be a Zoom meeting, so other people can, if they're interested in that, you know, would be able to, I should think, would be able to join it. So that's firstly. The second thing is that yesterday I booked a stall at the Edinburgh Climate Festival on the 14th of August, Saturday, Leeds Lakes, and I'm going to try to get material for that stall and Edinburgh TUC stall, and I'm going to think about writing some sort of leaflet or something on how to raise about retrofitting and how to raise consciousness what it's all about, given what we've talked about tonight. And so that's the second one. And the other thing is, I know Glasgow talked about having their conference on the 28th of August, and I don't see why that should be just confined to Glasgow people or Western Scotland people. I think that conference might be something that we're all interested, people in Edinburgh as well are interested in, and I think we should do our best to advertise that. So that's, for me, 3 action points, but if anyone thinks there should be other action points, and if you don't have a chance to say it tonight, please just kind of email me and suggest. So I'd like to do like a briefing on what happened, discussion tonight, and circulate to everyone. Now I've mentioned 3 action points, but I'd welcome other action points too.
Okay, many thanks for that, Des. Emma?
Yeah, I think it'd be great,
a minute or so, Emma, okay?
if possible, to speak about council manifestos and like prepare a bit of a strategy around some demands around the councillors come May next year. And I think it'd be great if people have the time to do a bit of that research around like the energy efficiency across Edinburgh, to see if there's like specific areas in Edinburgh that should be targeted first.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Emma. Great suggestion. Just having a little look down the list of participants, I don't see any other hands up. So if you do have a suggestion, please heed what Des said and drop him an email and let him know what your idea is. May I thank everybody for your contributions to tonight's meeting, especially to Ellen and Linda, Stuart, who's no longer with us, and to Emma for stepping in, and thank you very much for contributing to the discussion by asking questions or putting stuff in the chat. Really appreciate that. It's a terrific meeting. I really enjoyed being part of it, and I look forward to looking for the action points and moving forward with the action points in the near future. And with that, I will close the meeting and wish you all a good night.